11 canned tuna brands sit on American shelves right now, according to an Amish shopping standard passed down for 4 generations. Only 2 of them are actually real fish. A 2019 DNA authentication study on canned tuna sold in U.S. supermarkets found species mismatches, filler protein, and undeclared blends in the majority of tested samples. A pattern the FDA's standard of identity rule quietly permits. There is almost certainly a can of one of the 9 rejected brands sitting in your cabinet tonight. An Amish grandmother in Lancaster County taught me the exact test in under 30 seconds. Once you know it, you cannot unsee it. Go grab that can right now before this goes any further. Pull one down from the cabinet, set it on the counter, and keep it in front of you while you listen. Because in the next few minutes, you are going to look at that label the way she looked at it, and the words on the back are not going to read the same way ever again. Here is the promise. 9 out of 11 of the major canned tuna brands that dominate American shelves fail a shopping test that Amish households in Lancaster County, Holmes County, Ohio, and northern Indiana have been quietly running on grocery products since before World War II. Only 2 survive. And the reason they survive is not price. It is not the pretty logo. It is not the marketing word on the front. It is one specific thing on the back of the can that the food industry spent 70 years teaching you not to look at. That specific thing sits inside a legal rule most shoppers have never heard of. It is called the standard of identity, buried in the Code of Federal Regulations under 21 CFR Part 1.1, and in plain English, it is the rule that decides what a word like tuna is legally allowed to mean when it is printed on a can. Stay with me here, because this is where the label starts lying. The standard of identity for canned tuna does not require one species. It does not require domestic packing. It does not require a fixed drained weight to raw fish ratio. It does not require the same fish that was in the can in 1954 to be the same fish in the can in 2024. It allows blending. It allows substitution. It allows imported fish to be relabeled after packing. And once you understand that one rule, the entire aisle rearranges itself in front of you. But she did not know any of that in legal language. That is not how she taught me. I was standing inside a bulk food store off Route 340, the 2-lane road that cuts through the heart of Amish country in Lancaster County. Wooden shelves, handwritten price tags, a quiet that grocery stores in the outside world simply do not have. And she was there with a small folded piece of paper in her hand, a shopping list 4 items long, written in that neat slanted script older Amish women use. I saw the top of the list: flour, salt, baking soda, and a 4th word crossed out with a single clean line. That word was tuna. I asked her why. She did not lecture me. She did not warn me. She just picked up a can from the shelf, turned it around in her palm, and slid her thumbnail across the ingredient list the way you would test whether a piece of fruit was ripe. She said one sentence: if the ingredient list is longer than 3 words, put it back. That was the first rule. The full test has 4 parts. And once you hear it, you will realize you have already been doing pieces of it your whole life without knowing what you were looking at. First, read the ingredient list backward, from the last ingredient to the first, because manufacturers hide their weakest ingredients at the bottom, and the bottom is where the lie usually lives. Second, reject any word you would not use in your own kitchen. Vegetable broth, pyrophosphate, hydrolyzed soy protein, If it does not belong in a jar in your pantry, it does not belong in a fish that swam in an ocean. Third, compare the drained weight to the total can weight. If the difference is too large, you are paying for water, broth, or a filler dressed up as fish. Fourth, and this is the one almost nobody checks, look for the country of packing, not the country of catch. Those are two different lines, and they are almost never the same country. Most brands fail at Rule 2. They do not even survive Step 1 of the read backward test. And this is why the marketing team hoped you would skip it. To understand how the aisle got this way, you have to go back to 1954. That is the year the American canned tuna category quietly stopped being what its own grandparents thought it was. Before that decade, a can of tuna on a Pennsylvania grocery shelf usually meant one species, caught by one fleet, packed in a small regional cannery, and sold under a family name. After World War II, the wartime rationing formulas that had let the military stretch protein cheaply did not go away. They got absorbed into peacetime production. Canneries consolidated, fleets consolidated, and the word tuna began to legally cover a rotating cast of skipjack, yellowfin, and eventually tongol, a smaller Indo-Pacific species most American shoppers have never heard of and have almost certainly eaten. Nobody told the customer the word had been widened. The can still said tuna. The label still showed the same fish silhouette. The price still felt honest, but the thing inside had already started to drift. The Amish noticed because the Amish never stopped watching. They keep receipts. They keep community memory. When the bulk store notices that a can from 1998 has a different ingredient list than the can from 1988, that observation does not disappear into television static. It gets talked about at the co-op. It gets talked about at the market stand. It gets written down. And three of the brands most Americans think of as competitors are, as you will see, quietly the same company. Which brings us to the first name. The first rejected brand fails at the vegetable broth line. Somewhere in the late 1990s, the ingredient panel on this brand's mainline product picked up a new second ingredient, listed right after the fish, called vegetable broth. Vegetable broth in a can of tuna is not seasoning. It is volume. It is a legally permitted way to stretch the amount of actual fish in the can. By adding a liquid, the drain weight rule does not fully account for. If broth is ingredient 2, fish is being stretched. That is the rule. Flip the can. Look for broth. If you see it, put it back. The second rejected brand fails at the species line. It carries the words chunk light on the front. Chunk light sounds like a description. It is not. It is a legal category. And inside that category, more than one species is permitted in the same can. Independent DNA authentication studies of American canned seafood, the kind of testing organizations like Oceana have been running on retail samples for over a decade, have repeatedly found species substitution and undeclared blending inside cans labeled chunk light, meaning what you thought was one fish was, on any given day, potentially 2 or 3. That is not one bad batch. That is a legal category doing exactly what it was written to allow. The third rejected brand fails at the packing plant line. Look under the barcode. There is a tiny stamp there, easy to miss, that identifies the plant where the fish was packed into the can. On this brand, the fish is caught somewhere in the Pacific, but the can is filled in a Southeast Asian packing facility that operates under a different labeling regime than the United States. The front of the can says something warm and American. The back, in that one small line, tells you the fish took a very long detour before it got to your pantry. 3 more brands you think are unrelated share that same packing plant. That is a thread we will pull. The 4th rejected brand fails at the texture line. It uses sodium pyrophosphate, an additive on the FDA's generally recognized as safe list to hold the texture of the fish together after packing. If you have ever opened a can of tuna and thought the meat felt strangely uniform, strangely wet, strangely lacking in the natural flake of real cooked fish, that memory was not imagination. That was chemistry. The 5th rejected brand fails at the protein line. The nutrition panel on the front boasts a protein number that looks impressive. The drained weight on the back does not support that number. The gap is filled by hydrolyzed soy protein, a legal cheap protein extender that boosts the label figure without adding a single additional gram of fish. The label technically does not lie. The protein was not from fish. The 6th rejected brand fails at the marketing line. It leans on the phrase wild caught, printed large on the front, treated by shoppers as a quality guarantee. The FDA has no enforceable definition of wild caught for canned tuna. None. It is a marketing word, not a specification, which is why even the 2 brands that survived the Amish test do not rely on it. 6 brands, 6 different failures. And here is the trap door. Those 6 brands do not just fail separately. They share ownership. They share packing plants. They share ingredient suppliers. The illusion of choice on the shelf is exactly that, an illusion. And the parent company map that explains it is what we are opening next. If this happened to the word tuna, you should be asking a much harder question, the one the Amish were quietly asking a long time before anyone else. What else in this aisle has been hollowed out the same way? Keep that can in your hand. Here's where the aisle stops being an aisle and starts being a map. 3 parent companies. That is the real number behind the 11 logos. 3, not 11 independent canneries competing for your shelf attention, but 3 consolidated seafood corporations wearing 11 different faces. Write down these years for a moment, even if you do not know yet why they matter. 1997, 2008, 2015, those are acquisition years. In 1997, one of the last remaining independent American tuna canneries changed hands and was absorbed into a global seafood conglomerate. In 2008, a second brand most shoppers still assume is a scrappy family label was quietly folded into a Southeast Asian parent company that already owned 2 of its supposed competitors. In 2015, the store brand contract packing side of the industry consolidated even further, so that the cheap can on the bottom shelf and the premium can at eye level were by then coming out of the same production lines. You were not picking between brands. You were picking between labels. This is the piece the marketing team hoped you would skip. Once the parent company map is in front of you, the entire pattern from chapter 1 stops looking like coincidence. The same vegetable broth appears across brands that are supposedly rivals because the same procurement office wrote the same recipe. The same pyrophosphate texture fix appears across brands with different logos because the same packing plant runs the same additive protocol. The same wild-caught marketing phrase appears across cans owned by 3 different parents because none of the 3 parents want the phrase to have a legal definition. If it had a definition, one of them would have to be first to fail it. And this is where the suppression layer sits, not in a dramatic scandal, not in a single villain. It sits in the quiet, decade-long lobbying against two very specific things: country of origin clarity on the front of the can, and species-level labeling in the ingredient list. Every time either of those has been proposed in a form with real enforcement teeth, the industry has argued it would be too expensive, too confusing, too burdensome. The FDA standard of identity gap on species testing is not an oversight. It is a policy outcome, not banned but blended, not forgotten by accident, buried on purpose. The label was engineered to be legal, not honest, which is why the next 3 brands on the rejected list hit harder than the first 6, because now you know, so they are not accidents. The 7th rejected brand is the Premium Illusion. It sits at the top of the shelf, priced almost double the mainline cans, wearing gold-tone packaging and words like reserve and select. Turn it over. Look at the tiny stamp under the barcode. It shares a packing plant code with a discount brand 3 shelves down that costs less than half as much. Same plant, same fish suppliers, same additive protocol. The premium here is not in the can. The premium is in the printing. Price is not a proxy for authenticity. That is the rule this brand teaches. The 8th rejected brand is the store brand Tuna. Almost every major American grocery chain sells a house label canned tuna, and shoppers assume that house label is at least independent of the national brands, if only because it is cheaper and unbranded. It is not. Contract packing disclosures show that a large share of American store brand tuna is packed by one of the same 3 parent companies that own the shelf above it. The house label is the same fish from the same plant, under a different sticker, sold at a lower margin, so the parent can occupy both price tiers at once. Even the cheap option was theirs. Store brand does not mean independent. The 9th rejected brand is the Health Halo. This is the one that stings, because this is the brand the careful shopper reaches for. It carries a sustainability seal on the front. It uses phrases like low mercury and responsibly sourced. It costs more, and the shopper pays more willingly because the label seems to promise something the others do not. But the certification on the front is a marketing certification. It audits the fishery. It does not audit the ingredient panel on the back. Turn that can around. Read backward. You will still find broth. You will still find additives. You will still find the same standard of identity language that lets the same species blending happen inside a can wearing a green logo. The health-conscious shopper was targeted specifically because the health-conscious shopper pays more. Certifications are not ingredient audits. Now for the very proof that has been waiting since the hook. DNA authentication studies on retail seafood, the kind that organizations like Oceana have been running on samples pulled directly off American grocery shelves for more than a decade, keep finding the same 3 categories of failure in canned tuna. Species substitution, where the fish inside the can is not the fish the label implies. Undeclared blending, where more than one species is packed together, and only the umbrella word tuna is used. And filler protein, where the drained fish weight does not match the protein figure printed on the front, because the difference has been filled in with cheaper plant-based extenders. 3 failure categories, documented on retail samples, repeated across brands. This is not the Amish being paranoid. This is the science catching up to the shopping list. The Amish were not suspicious of tuna. They were early. And this is the moment the story flips. Because if 9 of the 11 brands fail, then 2 of them pass. 2 of them survived the 4-part shelf test the grandmother taught me on Route 340. 2 of them can sit in a Lancaster County pantry without being crossed off. And here is what makes those 2 survive. The first surviving brand passes on the ingredient panel alone. Turn the can. Read backward the way she showed you. There are only 2 ingredients, fish and either salt or water. That is it. No broth, no pyrophosphate, no hydrolyzed soy. The species is named specifically on the front, not hidden inside the chunk light legal umbrella. The packing plant listed under the barcode is domestic, in the same country the fish was landed in. So the packed in line and the product of line finally match. And the drained weight, when you compare it to the total can weight, sits within a reasonable band. You are paying for fish, you are receiving fish. The can is doing what the word on the front says it is doing. That is the entire test passed on one label. The second surviving brand passes on the sourcing story. It uses pole and line or single vessel fishing, which is a slower, more traceable method that makes species blending mechanically difficult because a single small boat cannot mix its catch the way a giant industrial fleet transferring to a floating processor can. The ingredient list is under 3 words. The packing origin is transparent and printed clearly, not buried under the barcode. It has not been acquired by any of the 3 parent companies. It has not changed its ingredient panel in decades. When the Amish Co-op ledger notes which brands have stayed the same, this one is on that list. It is more expensive than the failing brands. It is worth the difference because the difference is actual fish. 2 brands, 9 rejections, 1 test. Here's the test in the version you can carry into any grocery store starting today. 4 steps, simple enough to run standing in the aisle with a cart. First, ingredient list under 3 words. If you see broth, pyrophosphate, soy protein, or any word you would not use in your own kitchen, put the can back. Second, 1 species named on the label, not the phrase chunk light. An actual fish name, skipjack, albacore, yellowfin, named singular on the front. Third, the country of packing under the barcode matches the country of catch on the front. If those 2 lines disagree, the fish took a detour the label is trying not to explain. Fourth, the drained weight is within roughly 10% of the total can weight. If the gap is bigger, you are buying water, broth, or filler wearing a fish label. 4 steps, 30 seconds. Any can, any store, any brand you have not heard of yet. That is the whole thing. Now, step back and look at what you actually just learned. 11 brands, 3 parent companies, 1 legal loophole, 9 failures, 2 survivors. A category that used to mean one thing, quietly rewritten to mean something else, while the packaging stayed almost exactly the same so nobody would notice. A community that did notice because they never stopped reading. A shopping method 4 generations old that still works today in any American grocery store against a food industry that spent 70 years betting you would trust the front of the can instead of the back. You are now the shopper who reads what the marketing team hoped you would skip. That is not a small thing. That is a shift in how you walk through the entire store. Once you have run the 4-step test on a can of tuna, you will run it on a box of cereal without meaning to. You will run it on a package of deli meat without meaning to. You will run it on a bottle of oil, a loaf of bread, a tub of yogurt, a jar of sauce, and you are going to start seeing the same three patterns, the same standard of identity gaps, the same parent company shadows, the same quietly rewritten words in every aisle of the store, which is exactly why the Amish do not stop at tuna. So check your pantry right now. Pull down every can. Read the ingredient list backward. Look at the country of packing under the barcode. Compare the drained weight to the total weight. Tell me in the comments which one is sitting in your cabinet, a survivor or one of the 9. Because if it is one of the 9, you are not alone, and you are not the one who did anything wrong. The label was written to make you miss it. And the next category, the Amish reject, is worse. The ratio is not 9 out of 11. It is closer to 11 out of 12. It is the category almost every American family buys every single week, feeds to their children before school, and trusts more than tuna because the marketing on the front is even louder and the ingredient list on the back is even longer. Breakfast cereal. That is the next receipt. That is where this story goes next. Keep the can on the counter. You are going to need it.